Okay, so guys, it's a pleasure to have you with us. With that, I think we'll start our session. We have an exciting agenda for today. We are going to talk about best practices for website localization, especially for WordPress websites with WPML. My name is Hila, and I'm the Chief Marketing Officer at Blend Localization. And I have here with me Dean. Dean is a partnership and marketing manager at On The Go Systems. This is the company that brings WPML to all of us, the developer of WPML. And we are very, very excited to share with you everything we know and all our best practices and tips for succeeding with your website localization, how to do it right, maybe save you some challenges. So you can learn from the mistakes we did or we see. Again, thank you for joining us. I'm going to start with a quick intro, and then I'm going to pass the mic to Dean. Just for those of you who are not familiar with Blend, Blend is a leading localization provider, a global company. We have offices all over the world, from Israel to Europe and the United States, and also APAC in China. We work with global brands and global companies that really need high volume, continuous localization services at scale. Our clients are from various industries, and we provide the localization services that are powered by AI technologies, but are complemented or verified by human linguists. So we have a very large community of talents, linguists, and also voice actors, because we localize both voice and loc. So we are a one-stop for all the needs. Today, we are going to speak about website localization, but just for you to keep in mind, we deal with all types of content, and we have a strong technology partner platform. This is what allows us to integrate into WPML. And from that on, everything is happening automatically. Our talents are receiving the projects, running the translation, the localization, and then it goes back to our clients via the exact integration they chose. In this case, we are going to focus on WPML. I'm not going to speak much about Blend. It's not about us. Today, it's about how we are helping you to do localization in the best way you can. I'm sure I don't need to speak much about why we do localization, why do global brands localize their assets and their content. Obviously, buyers and people all around the world prefer to consume their content in their own language. And you can see here the numbers. Obviously, website is one of the content types that people want to read in their own language. And obviously, when you run a global business, you need to localize lots of assets and touch points with your clients. So everything should speak the same language and be coherent and consistent. Again, we will focus today on websites, but this is the checklist that you need to make sure you're checking when you are going global. I want to share with you a few short tips before we move to speak about WPML and WordPress specifically. When you guys start to think about web localization, or if you are a business that is just exploring the opportunity of going global, these are the things that I believe you should follow in order to do it right. And maybe before we move on, I'm going to ask you a quick question. Let me see that I'm doing it right. I want to run a short poll with you. Let's see. Do you see the question on the screen now? Just out of curiosity, I want to know what is the main reason that you joined us today? What brought you to this webinar? Is it to improve your website, learn about WPML, explore our services, just to learn and be here, you know? So great. Thank you for answering. So we see most of you are here in order to improve website localization workflows, which is great, and also to learn about WPML. So luckily we have Dean here. Thank you. I'm going to end the poll now. I can Yeah. Let's see what happens when I share results. You see the results. You see the results? Yeah. Okay, great. So let's move on. You still see my screen, right? So thank you guys. Thank you for your answers on it. By the way, I forgot to say, we welcome any questions. If you have any questions or comments during the webinar, feel free to use the chat or the Q&A. We have a Q&A here. Do you guys see Q&A? If not, just type your questions in the chat and we will be happy to address them as we go. So how do you get started? What's the first thing? First thing, you need to evaluate which market is the right market for you. Where do you start? Which language is the right one to start with? And in order to do that, my best tip for you is to, let's see, how do I move the slides? Look at your data. Obviously, looking at the data, oh my God, what happened? Wait. I'm going to stop sharing for a second. The presentation disappeared. When you look at your data, I will continue to speak while I'm opening it again. You can see, first of all, your Google Analytics is a great resource. Google Analytics will show you where are people coming from to your website. Sorry. What countries are they from? Probably what languages do they speak? And sorry for that, guys. It will take me a second. So looking at the data will help you. Also, sometimes when you watch recordings of sessions if you have a tool to monitor your website, you can see where people are from. If they are using a Chrome extension or an automatic translation tool, you can probably assume that they want to translate your website. So Dean is my witness here that I restarted my computer a minute before the webinar to avoid any technical issues and to make sure nothing will happen.
It's the Murphy's Law of webinars.
The Murphy's Laws, right? You know that I did it, right? You saw me restart my computer.
I bear witness for you.
Okay. Let's give it another second, see if I can open it. Maybe from somewhere else. So when I'll remember my tips, so I'll do it quickly. But if you look at the data and you know here it is, you know where people are coming from, it will help you choose the right market. Obviously, you need to think about how sensitive is this market. Is it language sensitive? Do I need to localize my website, or can I go with English into that market? And this is what we really recommend. Also, before you get started, an important step to do is to prepare the infrastructure, prepare your content for localization, make sure that everything in English is perfect, because if the English is not perfect, the translated website will also be not perfect. Don't expect French to be perfect if your English is not really on point. So this is one tip, and also working on your glossary, the key terminology that you want to keep coherent or consistent across various languages is also a great tip. And Dean will also speak about it, but coming with an SEO mindset, because when you are translating your website, when you are localizing your website, you really want to pay attention to SEO. You want to be ranked in a top position on search engines. Wherever you go in each country, the SEO, the Google results are different. You want to be visible, you want people to find you, so you need to pay attention to this. If you run a multilingual SEO keyword research, it will help you get there for sure. I have it open now. I'm going to share it. I'm sorry. I hope you will see it. So that's before getting started, preparing everything, thinking about SEO, thinking about your terminology and glossary, finding the right market where people are coming from. We talked about it, right? And I'm going to move to a presenter view. Sorry. Dean, do you see my screen?
Yeah, all good.
Okay. So we talked about the data. Here, I want to talk about how to do it. Like, obviously, you will not translate the entire website at once. Many businesses or companies, they have huge websites, thousands of pages, blog posts, product catalogs. My recommendation is to choose the MVP, like the minimum viable website, a lean structure, like all the most popular pages, and start with that, and then measuring the results, seeing the success, bringing some traffic to the website, and then obviously scaling and fully localizing your website. And then you can scale also to other languages for sure. We talked about the glossary. When you start translating your website, you really need to pay attention to many factors, or take them into account. You want high quality of the content. You want this to be able to scale. So some people do it with freelancers, with the translators that they found on Fiverr. You want to be able to scale. So be careful, like pay attention to this point. Choose a vendor or a company that can scale with your needs. Obviously, budget. Think about the cost. And today, with all the AI solutions out there, the cost is going down, which is great. You can localize more content in a more affordable way. Obviously, time, SLAs, and the technology around the website. And Dean will speak about how to prepare your website for localization from the technical perspective. And then obviously, once we localized our website and we learned everything about how to do it right, we need to bring traffic to the website. We need to run ads, because people will not just get there, okay? If you want to enter Germany, you localize your website to German. You really need to think about SEO, so people will discover your website when they search for your service, and also to run campaigns. And again, the campaigns can be localized or not localized. You can test it. We see here a test that showed that even though they did not translate a landing page, when they translated the ad to Danish in Denmark, and they compared it to the ad in English, it performed way better than the English, even though people landed on an English-speaking page. So this is a good indication that you might need to localize your website too if the Danish ads perform better. Same with Spanish. We see that in Hong Kong, people prefer English, so you need to see if the market is sensitive to language or not. And also one more small tip about ads. I don't know if you know, but Facebook have this dynamic language optimization capabilities, where if you provide Facebook with your ads in various languages, they can serve the right ad to the right customer in the language they prefer, according to their iOS language, operating system, phone system. So Facebook is helping you to optimize the campaigns when it comes to languages. So obviously, you guys know we need to measure everything we do. We localize, it costs money. We want to see the results, the uplift in sales, conversions, rankings. This is something that goes without saying, and scaling the efforts, as we said, once it works well, and it will work well, because Dean is here to show you all the secrets, you are able to scale and have a website in so many languages like these global companies do. We work with lots of companies that translate their website through WPML, and that's why we are here today, to show you how it's done. One more tip: when you are going with global marketing, entering new markets, think about your customers. What holidays are they celebrating? What are the right times to run promotions? So we have a calendar for you. This calendar is something that we provide for free. It's a free resource to show you all the days, all the special days and holidays in all the countries worldwide, and religions, and everything you need to pay attention to when you run a global business. And this is the link to our calendar. I'm going to move one slide. One word about Blend. I promised I will not talk about Blend, but I just want you guys to know. I mentioned that we provide the localization service based on AI and human professionals. And we took this one step forward, and very recently we launched Flexi. Flexi is our new solution. This is like the next stage of AI translations. It brings together machine translation memories, and quality estimation thanks to LLMs. And it helps us really help you guys reduce the localization cost, cut the budget by half at least, even more. and this without compromising on quality. So we guarantee the quality. Thanks to AI, we can really meet the standards that we choose together. The most important thing is that the human editing is still there. We still have human verification, human review, but we move more to AI to save you the cost. So we are happy to launch it. We are doing it for our clients, so we are helping you save money. We run the savings to our clients. This is Flexi. If you are interested, we would love to hear from you and tell you more about it. And with that, I'm going to stop sharing, and I'm going to move the mic to Dean. And Dean is going to speak about the bits and bytes of website localization. This is where it becomes more interesting. Dean, you can share your screen, I hope.
Let's hope I don't have any Murphy's Law troubles. I'm
Yeah,
about
I
to
hope
share
so.
right now.
On my side.
Let's take a look here.
Let's see if we can activate the Q&A. You guys, do you see the Q&A in the... Dean, maybe I'll ask one more question in the run another short poll. Let's see, what is it? Okay, I want to ask you guys if you're already using WPML or maybe you're considering to use it. So amazing, great. So some of you are already using it, and the other half is considering to use it. That's great. That's what we are here for. Amazing. Okay, I'm gonna end it now. Okay, go ahead.
Great. So you can see my screen. Everything's good?
Yes.
Fantastic. Well, firstly, thanks for the intro, Hila. Yeah, set the tone very nicely there, and obviously thanks everyone for joining and showing interest in the topic. That of course is both dear to Blend and WPML, and yeah, it's also worth saying we've had a really long-standing partnership. So yeah, it's nice to be able to do these kind of webinars and engage with one another's audiences as well. So yeah, without further ado, I suppose you don't even need this first slide. I think everyone knows what the topic is by now. So let me go straight into the next. So yeah, already Hila mentioned both of these topics, localization and translation, but I think it's still worth just rehashing them once before we continue here. So typically, say in software, localization tends to refer to the translation of the UI UX or the interface of software so that those using the software can engage with it in their primary language. But we see this in business as well. So naturally, if you're selling products or services, you would want to, I guess you can say, adapt these based on your audience's specific demographic. So the way you market your service or your products to an English-speaking audience would naturally be different from a translation perspective, but also from a localization perspective in the sense that there would be certain cultural nuances and aspects that you'd want to pay close attention to. And then, of course, there's the obvious, which is essentially what we're focusing mostly on here, and that is translation, or at least from WPML's perspective. So with translation, we're usually referring to what we call front-facing texts. In the case of websites, yes, there is more than text, but predominantly we're speaking of texts. But on a website, you might have videos, media that can also be translated. But typically with WPML, we're talking about the translation of your text content. So yeah, both of these, this terminology I'll be using it throughout this presentation. So just wanted to clarify these just so that we're all on the same page. And then, yeah, again, as I mentioned, both of these topics are important to consider. Oftentimes, I think when people think of having their website in another language, the automatic assumption is, well, oh, I need to translate my texts. As we've just described, there's a little more to it than that. Besides your media translations, there's also your localization. And as Hila mentioned, this is a great thing to include in your initial multilingual kind of strategy. So, also before we get into the nitty-gritty of things, I guess the question would be, why even go multilingual at all? So also I just wanted to quickly acknowledge that I'm sure there's a bunch of different types of people in this call, from business owners to web designers to product managers. I'm going to try and, not give too much, not give too little. Do bear with me if, yeah, for some people, maybe the information is pretty obvious, but for others, it may not be. So I'd like to try cover, get the right middle ground here. So yeah, why even go multilingual at all? So I thought a nice way to frame this would be just to even look at our own site, which is wpml.org. So we have a plugin for WordPress, which obviously enables WordPress users to go multilingual. Naturally, we would want our sites in additional secondary languages as well, so that we can sell to our target audiences. So, of course, our site is powered by WPML itself. And I've just run a few stats here that I think might be interesting for you. So I'm not gonna just, yeah, I don't want to just read off the slide, but you guys can just view it on your own if you want. But in summary, we attract, at this point, with 13 secondary languages, attract users from 100 different countries. And our top countries still tend to be mostly Central Europe, because this is a very typical use case for going multilingual in the first place. And we have some in the US. The US also tends to be somewhat multilingual. And you can also see here how some of our top languages also account for a fairly nice portion of our revenue. And obviously, had we not decided to go multilingual, we would be losing out on that potential business. We could assume that maybe some people who speak these languages are seeking our products would find a way to find our website and purchase. But I think the path to purchase conversions would be a lot harder for us if we didn't actually have our sites in these languages. And this speaks again here to the purchasing power. And here's just a nice stat to say Germany, Switzerland, Austria, which, if we do an approximate population calculation, accounts for around 11% of our revenue, while Spain, Mexico, Chile, etc., which is of a larger population, accounts for a slightly smaller percentage. So also worth noting, even in so-called smaller demographics, there still is a chance to really optimize sales. And then, of course, the Asian market, which accounts for about 16% of our users and about 8% of our revenue. India and Japan being best markets so far. This also relates, of course, to our niche, which is WordPress. We find that in Asia so far, maybe WordPress is not so popular as a solution. Japan, in terms of Southeast Asia, Japan tends to be the most clued up in terms of WordPress. So as people into WordPress, we've got some work to do to promote it more in Asia. And then otherwise, India is a big market for us, hence why we see these kind of numbers. Right, let me move to the next.
Great data, Dean. Thank you.
Thanks. And then, yeah, obviously, a lot of this happens as a result of multilingual SEO. So this is something also Hila mentioned. SEO, again, just to reiterate, search engine optimization. In other words, appearing on Google. Well, we most typically talk Google, but in Asia, you also have various other search engines. And even in the West, you also have the likes of Bing and Yahoo. But for the most part, people are focused on Google for obvious reasons. And what we've seen here as well, here's just a very simple example of a few keywords that we rank for, multilingual keywords that we rank highly for, that allow us to capture market share from non-English speaking territories. And also, just again to say, our software itself firstly enables web designers and web builders to make their WordPress sites multilingual, but our software itself is also translated. So if you're building a German site and you want to essentially engage with the WPML interface in your own language, in German, our software is translated. Hence why it makes sense for us to have a multilingual site. We've got multilingual software, and we offer the ability to create multilingual sites in WordPress. I'm mentioning this because I think this is it's an important thing to consider, how all these things kind of relate. And yeah, so essentially the point here being that the return on investment on simple multilingual SEO is almost net positive. So the amount of effort it took for us to translate our site was fairly low. I mean, we have a very large site, so it takes some maintenance. But even with just translating the key content, especially stuff like, main landing pages, checkout experience, doing the basic, doing even just simple translations with simple multilingual SEO in mind, we find a net positive results. Um, and it's also worth mentioning here with WPML, you own your translations. What does this mean? It means that when you translate your content with whatever method you choose, that translated content is actually stored in your website database, which means you have full control over it. So should you want to tweak your SEO, you can do that quite easily. Rather than, for example, Hila also mentioned it earlier. If you're just relying on your clients to use, say, like a Google Chrome translation widget, you don't own those translations, so you don't actually have the control over it, and hence you've got close to zero chance of, or probably zero chance of ranking for any actual multilingual SEO keywords.
And also watching some translation that we see, it's very, very wrong. And
Yeah,
you
it
don't
tends to
want to
be
mislead your audiences, so don't trust it. Yeah.
precisely. It tends to be a bit out of context, or not entirely accurate. This is why. I mean, I'm sure this is a question that often comes up. Why should I use a translation plugin instead of just allowing my clients to click on a Chrome widget and translate the site themselves? Well, this would be one of the fundamental reasons, amongst others. So yeah, this is just a quick case of our own site. I shared a little link here. By the way, we will put together a little pack for you guys after this call, so you do have access to the links.
By the way, Dean, many other
Yes,
services that translate websites, they also don't let you full control of the content and lack with SEO capabilities. And sometimes it's just hosted on the cloud, not on your infrastructure. So this is also a
precisely.
great advantage of WPML and WordPress.
Precisely. There are other, translation plugins where the translations, well, although the plugin does translate your site, the actual translations are stored on the cloud. If you had to stop subscribing to the service, you'd lose your translation. In our case, we actually send the translation back to your website and store it in the database. Hence, you own it technically. Um, so yeah, like I said, if you guys do want to take a look at any other interesting examples of sites powered by WPML, we do have a link to a showcase, and you can explore that for your own interest. Right. So, actually building a site. Of course, you've got many options to build a site. I'm assuming everyone here, based on the topic of the of the webinar, knows about WordPress, but just a few little tidbits to again set the tone. Most people have probably heard the statistic, but WordPress powers over 43% of the web, which is still impressive. And I think we see it now more and more in kind of large scale sites, enterprise level sites, stuff like, the New York Times, TechCrunch. We also saw NASA recently using WordPress. So although many consider it as maybe sometimes basic at times or it's for beginners, I think this is a bit of a misconception. It can certainly be used pretty much on any scale. It's also worth noting the term open source. Again, some might be familiar with this, others might not. This is important to note, as essentially what this means is that WordPress, the source code for WordPress is publicly available. So if anyone even wanted to create a WordPress 2.0 or their own version of WordPress, the source code's available. You could even fork it into your own version. This is, I think, one of the benefits of WordPress. It makes it extremely flexible. Of course, one would need technical knowledge to do such things, but if you're using WordPress in a basic way, it's pretty much plug and play. But it's nice to know that it is available. It's not proprietary like many other CMSs on the market. Um, but this also means that, there is a big ecosystem of themes and plugins, which we'll touch on very shortly, that allows WordPress to actually have a strong business case. Um, and as mentioned, WordPress become a lot more scalable. I just shared a quick link here. I won't talk about it too much, but this was seen as maybe one of the downsides of WordPress. We now see many, many enterprises using it for really big projects. And it also integrates really nicely with other tools. So Hila mentioned earlier on, Having the ability to get true, good, clear analytics about where your users are coming from is critical. WordPress integrates really easily with the likes of your Google Analytics, various CRM tools like HubSpot, et cetera, et cetera. No, it all sounds really great, which it is. We're all WordPress advocates. But at the same time, I think there are some downsides or challenges and dilemmas to be aware of upfront. I think this will help you plan your sites a little bit better in advance. So I think the first obvious thing is the idea of option paralysis. So WordPress being open source and community based means there's many, many options. There's many, many people contributing to the project. You've got the WordPress core, but in order for WordPress to be useful as a platform to build sites, you need themes, you need plugins, and probably some other sort of marketing and analytics types integrations. And anyone can really contribute. So what we often see, and I've seen this as well in the past when I was building more sites myself, is that because there's so many options, it's easy to make poor choices. So using cheap themes, using cheap plugins, or plugins that are not well maintained by their authors. This just means that, yeah, in the end, in the long term, you're kind of setting yourself up for potential failure. So let's keep that in mind. We'll discuss what are the best practices to avoid this, but that's one of the obvious issues. I think also ease of use assumptions is something very common. So like I said earlier, WordPress tends to be seen as kind of like the solution for non-techies. I think for the most part, this is the case, but just like any other piece of software, there's a learning curve. The more you know about it, the better your projects will be. Now, I am also aware, again, in this call, probably there's different skill levels here. There's different stakeholders, from people who maybe just manage websites to those that actually build them. But nevertheless, I think it's important that whoever is designing your site, maintaining your WordPress site, needs to have the fundamental knowledge. Because again, if we go under the assumption that, oh, WordPress is just for non-techies, it's very simple, I think we might shoot ourselves in the foot later on. So yeah, this is something that we see often. So basically, wherever you are in the picture, do your best to familiarize yourself with the fundamentals. And then also that WordPress only comes in one language out of the box. So what does that mean? If you set up a new site, you install WordPress, and you want to publish some content, you'll see you can only do that in one language. Now, that might be English, it might be German, French, whatever that may be. If you wanted to then add an additional language, WordPress doesn't have this feature natively. Hence why we have something like WPML. It came precisely out of that need. Right, so now to address some of these. In terms of the option paralysis. So again, this is an education thing. You're going to have to take some time to familiarize yourself and understand the theme and plugin ecosystem. Again, there are many themes, there are many plugins, and without them, you basically don't have a WordPress site. I mean, WordPress over the years has tried to develop the CMS to a point where it could be used almost standalone, but we still haven't seen it get quite there. So in almost, I would say 100% of cases, you're going to encounter these things called themes and plugins. They both interact, or they all interact with one another. And in that sense, it's important to understand also what WordPress offers natively. So out of the box, like, of course, there's certain ways to publish pages, posts, arrange your design elements, but also understand what it doesn't offer natively and how you can then use plugins to add this functionality that you need. And themes, I think probably everyone knows here, but this is pretty much for your front-facing design elements. Some themes are a bit more robust, but again, understanding what it is that you actually need. And then while you're doing that, I'd say do yourself the favor of trying to understand like who are the most reputable businesses in the ecosystem. Now, I don't have any direct resources for this. This is more just kind of staying on top of WordPress news, familiarize yourself through blogs, YouTube channels. Much like any product or service, you want to go with those that are most reputable. This means in the long term that as you run your updates on your site, probably you'll have stable websites. One of the biggest problem is instability due to authors of plugins lacking resources to update it, etc., etc. Then understanding the concept of compatibility. I'm raising this early because this applies directly to the multilingual context a bit later. So again, I'm not gonna go into too much detail here, but again, understanding that themes, plugins, and the WordPress core framework all need to interact together. And in order for that to happen, these components need to play nicely. And by play nicely, our fancy word is compatibility. So to
Dean,
carry on
we
expanding some of,
we
yes?
had here a question about what are the most critical factors for ensuring compatibility between WPML plugin and third-party TMS? I think you'll speak about it later, right?
Yes, this is
Yes.
this is going to come up just a little bit
Okay,
later.
great.
Right. So now a few other things that, again, for some might be obvious, but I think is worth speaking about in any case. Um, we see this often, especially with working with translation services as well, is sometimes there's a gap in understanding about how content in WordPress is actually created. Um, so in WordPress, the most common ways would be your pages and your posts. I think this is quite obvious. Pages being like your about page or your contact us page, posts usually relating to blog posts, but also sometimes you might have a site like a real estate site where your posts are actually custom. We call them custom post types. So your post might be something like a property. But in general, pages and posts kind of encompasses all of that. Then you got content coming from themes and plugins. Um, this is where, of course, your themes and plugins also interact with pages and posts. But you might have a plugin that has its own type of content, themes that also allow for its own type of content. And then this also includes things like strings. So strings are small pieces of text that comes out of the box with themes and plugins. Some of them are purely for backend, like text that help you navigate the user interface on the back end. Others that are small pieces of text that appear on the front end, maybe a copyright text, maybe a label for something. These are smaller pieces of text. Then there's also content created by users. We call this UGC or user-generated comments. User-generated content like comments, reviews, etc. So this is the content that literally your users basically publish on your site. And then you've got media, images, video, audio, etc. So there's a whole bunch of different content that actually can be stored on a WordPress site. Most people, I think, assume that it's all one and the same, kind of like a Word document. If you dump all your content there, it's all in one place, it's all the same thing. In WordPress, it's not. All this content is stored differently in the database, which means that when it comes to translation, if you're using a plugin like WPML, WPML needs to understand how to fetch that content so that you can translate it easily. We'll get back to soon why this is important. Then also user management. So given that there's different content coming from different places, I think it's always important to manage your users on your WordPress sites. So often WordPress sites rely on various contributors, whether that be in-house in your business or third parties that you've employed to deal with your site on an ad hoc basis. Whoever has access to WP admin, so all the admin features of your backend, make sure that they understand sufficiently how to use the software itself. Now, of course, that means you yourself will also need to understand some of the fundamentals to hold people accountable. We often find this sounds like an obvious thing, but we often find that sites that tend to be the hardest to translate are ones that have been hacked together by many different people. This is something you'd want to avoid. Now, the multilingual parts in more depth. So we mentioned WordPress comes out of the box in only one language. This is why WPML exists. In essence, it adds a TMS or translation management system to WordPress. It also allows for a language switcher, which is crucial from a user perspective to be able to jump between languages. It also allows you to implement translations with whatever method you choose. There's a number of them, and allows you to easily connect with services like Blend. So yeah, we've covered some general topics. Now we'll tie in the multilingual part. So this should answer that one pending question. Use WPML compatible themes and plugins. So this is something that comes up very often. We mentioned compatibility in general, but the same thing applies now on the multilingual level. So having a site work in one language is already a challenge. Now adding an extra multilingual layer on top of that is an extra layer of complexity. So what we recommend is to use both plugins and themes that we've already vetted and worked with developers and authors on integrations that allow them to work smoothly with our plugin. Worth noting that the ecosystem is huge. As I mentioned, it's open source, many, many contributors. Luckily, we've worked with a pretty large scope of the ecosystem, certainly the biggest players in the ecosystem. So when you're building a site and you're considering going multilingual, we've got two resources, one which is a directory of recommended plugins. We've categorized those in different ways. You can search as well per category, and we've got the same for themes. I'm not going to go into that because I know we're already running a little short on time. But this is a recommended resource that we have. Always consider this right at the beginning when you're planning your multilingual strategy. This is crucial. It's also worth saying this is part of my role at WPML, is that we actively work with third-party authors in the ecosystem. We have a compatibility program. And in the rare case that you do stumble on compatibility issues, let us know via support. These usually reach me, I reach the author, and we get these resolved fairly quickly. Again, I go back to saying what I said earlier. If you use reputable themes, reputable plugins, chances are you wouldn't even need to look at these directories. We've worked with all of the biggest players in the ecosystem. So yeah, I hope that answers the question. If it didn't, let me know if there's any follow-ups. Then another point which might seem fairly obvious, but very important, is keep your setup simple. Like I said earlier, because WordPress is such a large ecosystem, there is sometimes a tendency to over-engineer. But basically, the more plugins you add to your site, the more risk you have for compatibility issues in general, even without the multilingual parts. If you're piecing together a whole lot of different functionality with a long list of plugins, there's a chance that at some point there's going to be a plugin that doesn't play so nicely with another. You've got compatibility problems, and then with the multilingual layer added to that, you can understand why this gets complex. Maintenance issues, again, WordPress relies on updates from authors of themes and plugins. The more you have, the more you're reliant on these authors to maintain their own themes and plugins that you're using. And this can therefore affect your site in the long term if you have many of these plugins installed on your site. Translation issues is obvious here, and then performance issues as well. So it's worth noting that when you're translating your sites, at least with WPML, where we store your data in the database, it's worth noting that essentially what you're doing is duplicating content into secondary languages. So if you've got a site that's been pieced together with many different plugins, content from coming from all different places, you're probably already going to have some performance issues. When you add the multilingual layer on top of that, you can understand where this is going. So I think simplicity in setup is really important if one can do this. This sets you up for continued good performance when you add the multilingual layer. Often you'll find in various forums and discussions about multilingual plugins, many people bring up the performance aspect. This, in 90% of the cases, tends to be the issue. It's sites that already started very complex and very large. You're adding another layer of multilingual, you're bound to run into issues. And just to further elaborate on that, we've got a few little pointers here that might help. Firstly, checking WPML's minimum requirements. These are fairly simple. When we talk about minimum requirements, this usually relates to your hosting provider. So, which is another factor, but that's a discussion for another day. You want to be hosting a website with a reputable hosting company that understands WordPress, that provides the infrastructure for hosting WordPress sites. And you'd want to check that their minimum requirements match ours. Again, we've got another resource here. We've got a list of various hosting partners that we've worked with over time that offer these types of services and infrastructure.
Maybe Dean, it's time to say
Yes,
that we will share the slides with you, so you'll have all the links. Don't worry
yes,
about it. Yeah.
precisely. Right, then caching plugins. Again, here got a category for that in our directory, so you can see which caching solutions we recommend. Optimizing the size of your site's media. This goes back to my point saying essentially you're creating copies. So if you've got a bunch of media, even if it's photographs that are all really, really big, and now you want to duplicate that for your secondary languages or even translate the media, you're going to start bloating your site more and more. So again, simplicity in general, optimization in general will only stand you in good stead when now you start adding the multilingual layer on top of that. And then the biggest rule of thumb, always keep your themes and plugins up to date. So again, WordPress is a community ecosystem. It relies on developers of third-party software to basically update their software in line with WordPress updates. If the theme and plugins you're using are not following these best practices, probably you're going to have issues going forward. And likewise, if you're not keeping up to date with updates on your own sites, you're also setting yourself up for failure. So this is really, really crucial. And whoever's managing your site, this should be one of their core responsibilities. So yeah, very quick reiteration here because Hilla touched on them earlier, but plan your multilingual strategy carefully. I think one point that maybe wasn't mentioned is be realistic with your resources. What we often find is people overshooting a little bit early. Even from a business perspective, if you're now marketing your business to an international audience, make sure that you have the necessary business infrastructure to handle that. So for us at WPML, since we offer a multilingual plugin and we have the software in multiple languages as well, we should expect that we're going to have support requests in multiple languages. So we've set ourselves up from a resource perspective to make sure that we can now handle a multilingual audience. This also, I think, based on your resource, will help you strategize and understand, okay, which languages do I start with? How big do I go? How soon? And then again, keeping localization in mind. So WPML is great for translations, but we're not an agency or a service. We're the plugin. So WPML doesn't is not necessarily going to help you with the localization aspect. This is where you need to understand your market so that you can implement translations correctly and make sure that your site is also nicely localized and optimized for users from various demographics. Just a quick example, in WPML, you can have a right to left version of your site, for example, in Hebrew. But WPML can't figure out how a Hebrew speaker from a specific demographic might want to interact with the content on your site. This requires some level of human research.
Right, and not only that, then if I may, it also requires some development or design adaptation of the WordPress itself
Exactly.
before sending content through WPML to translation. But still, it's like, yeah, it's possible and should be done.
Yeah, exactly. So obviously, by changing the language or having additional languages on your site, it's not going to be a direct one-to-one from your English to the secondary language. Texts might be longer, they might be shorter, it might kind of break your design a little bit. You definitely want to keep this in mind early on through, for example, developing your sites on staging sites, testing
That,
before you go straight to production.
right, that's where quality assurance can be very, very helpful, like functional QA and linguistic QA and also design QA on the website. So,
Exactly. And then, yeah, adding your content in a consistent way. So this ties in what I was talking about earlier. With multiple contributors on your site, there's always a risk of content becoming a bit muddled or inconsistent. I'd say do your best to find contributors who understand WordPress well enough that you're able to retain the consistency of the content on your sites. Just a little example from back in the day when I used to freelance. Some of the most frustrating projects for me to work on were ones where it was websites being handed over to me and they needed to have some sort of design updates or content updates. And it took me forever to find out where content was coming from, how it's pieced together. Some is in HTML, some is in blocks, some are in page builder elements. And then it becomes very overwhelming to actually maintain that. So again, goes back to simplification, understanding what WordPress can do out of the box, how your theme and your plugins interact together, how content is stored, and do it in the most mindful way possible. And again, if you have various contributors on your site, make sure that they understand this as well. We already
Also,
mentioned,
then in the
yes.
development phase, if you keep localization in mind, like tell your developer, we might someday want to go multilingual or global. It really helps in the future. Like it really simplifies this point of consistency and simplicity, because otherwise it's really hard to do it.
Yes, and this actually segues perfectly into the next point, which is if you do have any special customizations, make sure that they follow WordPress standards. So again, I know probably a bunch of people here are not developers, but if you've got developers working on your site, have the awareness to say to them, well, look, if you're doing anything custom or anything that's a little bit more complex, let's make sure that they're in line with WordPress standards. These are pretty, if you say this to a developer, they'll probably know what you're talking about. There's plenty of resources about it. But this is particularly important because one of the stumbling blocks we often see is sites that are a little bit more complex. They do have customizations. And now there's certain texts from these customizations that the website owner wants to translate. And now the text can't be found. And then we see that it's, oh, actually in the customization, the way the customization was developed was not necessarily in line with best practices, especially for localization and translation. So this is really crucial. But I'd say this mainly applies to your more advanced, complex WordPress setups. And we've mentioned it already, but keep multilingual SEO top of mind. Again, even just implementing the basics is often enough of a good starting point. And if you're using a translation service like Blend, yeah, make this part of your discussion. I mean, I'm sure Blend already does this when onboarding clients. But yeah, it's kind of one of those why not type of things. You're translating your site, you might as well take advantage of multilingual SEO. Right, so now I'm going to dive into something a little bit more WPML specific. So in WPML, we've got this thing called translation management. It's always existed in WPML, but we've got a forthcoming version which should be available publicly as a production version in the next month. Currently, if you are a WPML user, you'll find the beta version available, but this is just for your use it on staging sites if you want to play around with it. Not yet fully ready for production, coming soon. One of the big parts of this update is that we've done some major usability changes to our translation management dashboard. It's essentially now the recommended interface for translating all of your content. For those that are familiar with WPML, we still do have other modules like your string translation, but we've tried our best to consolidate all content translation directly via translation management, essentially making it easier to see what content you have on your site that's available for translation. It allows you to easily select what you'd like to send. And that's basically it from one place, no jumping between modules. So I'll give you a quick little demo here of what that looks like, so you have an idea. Just to mention here in this demo, I've already connected Blend as a translation service. The obvious way to do this in WPML when you've installed it on a new site is in the setup wizard. You've got an option to choose a translation service. There'll be a little pop-up. You've got a list there. You can find Blend and activate it. Upon activation, you'll get codes, essentially activation codes from Blend. You pop those in, you activate it, and you're ready to go. Once you've done that, well, here's a little demo site. This is basically using just an Astra theme, a very popular theme in the ecosystem. I just dumped in a template. You'll see it's currently only available in English. This is a little language switcher that WPML adds. And when I want to go and translate that, I'm now connected already with Blend. I simply go to translation management. I can now see here in my step one, I can select the content that I want to send for translation. We've now added these different panels for each different type of content, which makes it a bit easier to navigate. They're also completely collapsible. This is a very basic site, so for more advanced sites, you'll probably have a bit of a longer list, like section for your contact forms or a section for your custom fields. But this makes it easy to choose and select your content. You also have various filters at the top here. So once you have, like we're talking about multilingual strategy, if you have only started with some content, you might want to see just that content which is not completed and filter out the completed translations. You'll also see little icons here that tell you based on your language pair what is translated, what isn't. But yeah, to get back to it, here I can now select if I want to send a post. I want to send maybe just 2 of my pages. You'll see at the bottom these items being added to the basket, if you want to call it that. There's also a section here. Remember, we spoke about strings. So these are your smaller texts that you may or may not want to translate. We also have special filtering to tell you where these are coming from. So many of these, in fact, all of these on this particular test site are backend strings, which means it's really just the backend interface texts. None of them are front facing, but if you have front facing texts, these can be filtered. You might decide, actually, I don't want to spend money translating a whole bunch of backend strings. I actually only want to use my resources for those that are strings that are viewable on the front end. You could filter those, select them, and send them for translation right at the bottom. So here I've just got 1 post, 2 pages. I've got a word estimation, and I can decide how I want to translate that per language. So I can either say, cool, I want to assign this to a translation service. In this case, we're connected to Blend. So I could just send it all. I might actually want to translate myself. Maybe I'm a French speaker myself, and actually I just want to handle that content on my own and just send the German to a translation service. You've got all the flexibility for that here. And once you've selected that, this is where the nice little integration comes into play with Blend, is that you can select a little bit about the context, which will help Blend understand just how to focus the translations. You can give it a batch name and a suggested deadline, which is a bit of extra metadata that the Blend team will receive on the other end. Simply hit translate. I'm not going to do that right now, otherwise we'll spend a bit more time here going back and forth. But once you've hit translate, the content will go straight over to Blend. They'll be able to access that in their own TMS. They'll work on it, send it back. And when you go to the translation queue, which is over here, right now you'll see nothing because you haven't sent it. But in your translation queue, you'll see all those pieces of content you've sent with the statuses, and that allows you to essentially keep track.
Dean,
So
our time is
really,
almost up, so
yes.
I want to be careful with the time. Do you
Perfect. Well,
maybe?
that wraps it up, I think, as quickly as I could. I know it was a bit rushed. Should I quickly end with the translation readiness topic,
Yes,
or
yes,
would you like
yes.
to open
Yes.
to the floor?
No, go ahead.
Great. So, 1 second. Translation readiness. This is also as a result of a really nice partnership between WPML and Blend. What we offer you as users looking to create multilingual sites is a free website review. So if you have some doubts about whether or not your site is in fact multilingual ready or not, we're happy to take a look for you. All you need to do is follow this link, which we will share with you after the call. There's a little form here. It allows us to get some details about your site, themes, plugins, etc., etc. We will get that form submission on our end. One of our supporters will analyze the submission, analyze your site, and basically send back a report with feedback. So we've obviously got a long history and deep knowledge of which themes and plugins work really nicely on WordPress sites. We'll be able to give you a bit of advice and point you in the right direction should we see some potential issues. This then allows you to at least have some good upfront knowledge before you start, diving into the translation, only to come back late and say, oh, I didn't anticipate this. Now I have to deal with this issue after the fact. So I think this helps clients. This helps the relationship between Blend and WPML. So I encourage anyone to use this service. And I think so far it's really helped mitigate a lot of problems.
Right.
So yeah, I think that wraps it up.
Amazing. Wow. Thank you, Dean. Thanks for sharing all this information. I really like the demo. I love the 4.7 version. I think it's really nice as a user of WPML because we are also translating the Blend website with it. It's really amazing to see this beautiful UX. Guys, thank you for joining us. Our time is over. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. We can connect you to Dean. You can reach out to Blend. Pleasure to have you here. We will send you the recording, the presentations, everything will get to you probably tomorrow. And thanks a lot for being here. Dean, thanks for sharing it with us,
My
joining
pleasure.
us.
Yeah. Thanks for the invite.
Um,
Yeah,
just
I
like
hope I
in my,
managed to cover it all. I know it was very condensed, but
yeah,
hopefully it
yeah,
was useful to everyone.
great. Let's see if we have any question in the chat. Would you recommend using a multi-site site setup instead of a single site for running multiple languages for better performance?
It's
What's
a
your
good
take?
it's a good question and a little bit of a hot topic in the multilingual space. WPML does allow for multi-sites, so you can set this up. There are some of our competitors' plugins that really push multi-site setups. I think it totally depends on your context. I wouldn't assume that having a multi-site setup automatically sets you up for better performance. Um, I would research it, depending on the scale of your site, depending on what you want to achieve with your site, and may or may not be the solution for you. I can say, however, that the vast majority of our clients tend to use a single site installation because again,
Yeah, it's
WPML
much easier
already
to maintain and to,
yeah,
update.
we typically find it's a little bit less technical, easier to update. Again, if you've got a where we do see multi-site setups maybe be more useful is in like very large, say like e-commerce setups where you've got, I don't know, a large brand that operates in many different countries, and you want different sites per country because it would just be really cumbersome to have, one
Yeah,
person dealing on a single site installation with many contributors. This could get problematic where it might make sense to then split the site out into a multi-site and have a site per language. Again, WPML can allow you to do this. It is a more technical case, but it might apply. Yeah. But again, I would say we shouldn't assume that this type of setup is now just better
better.
performance.
Yeah,
Yeah, that would be
great.
my quick answer to that.
Thank you, Dean. Thank you, everyone. Have a good afternoon, day, depends where you are.
Thank you,
And see you
everyone.
soon. Bye bye.